Well, welcome back again to Cassimotive, and in this video what I wanted to do is I wanted to share with you 5 lessons that I learned from Khalil Rafati, a drug addict who turned a millionaire. And as you will know, I'm always trying to find ways in which I can add value into your life and trying to find individuals and stories and lessons and strategies and tactics from people who've managed to go from nothing to being something, from being drug addicts to turning their life around to being in debt to becoming multimillionaires. And I've basically found that there were these common denominators amongst these individuals, and that's essentially what I wanted to try and share with you today, and I hope can add some value into your life and can help you become a higher, fuller expression of yourself. So let's go through 5 lessons which I learned from studying this gentleman, and let's see if I can add some value to you. By the way, if the video you find it useful and there are some lessons in here which you think would be interested for you, jump on my YouTube channel Cassimotive and subscribe, because that's where I put up most of my videos, so that I can keep sending more of these kinds of videos so that you can become your highest, fullest expression of who you're capable of becoming. Okay, so let's go through it. 5 lessons. The first lesson that I wanted to share with you is that most people who end up homeless, or who end up druggies, or who end up in gangs, or who end up sort of alcoholics or gambling, that many of them, they're a product of their childhood. They're a product of their upbringing. When I first started studying people who turned their lives around, it was almost a bit of a shock to me, because one of the things that I started noticing amongst every single one of them is that all of them started going into these situations, not in their adult years, but there were many of them triggered by something that happened, usually from their childhood. And so then on top of this, I started studying books like psychology books and sociology books, and I started looking at therapy and what it is, why therapy people are going to therapy, and child development books. And what I began to notice is that essentially I cannot overstate the significance of your childhood and the impact that it has on you. And essentially what I discovered was that the childhood that you're brought up in basically sets as a blueprint for the rest of your life. So to put it another way, if you think of your childhood being like a computer, okay? When a child is born, they basically are like, you've just bought a new computer. There's no software, there's absolutely nothing on it. The software that you put onto that computer initially, the word processor, the Microsoft Office, the kinds of firewalls that you put on it, essentially everything that you do using that computer will be based on whatever you've downloaded onto it, right? And that's the way we as adults work. See, I can always predict almost certainly what you're going to be like as a teenager, as an adult, based on your childhood. And this actually becomes a bit of a hard truth, and it's kind of horrible to say this to people, because people then all of a sudden get defensive. They're like, well, I don't want to be like my parents, I don't want to be anything like my mum. And the reality is that you will copy. Basically, we need to have a model. In order to make a decision, you need to have a way to make a decision. And as a child, when we're growing up, we are constantly getting all this sensory input. We're looking at what our parents are doing, what we're being exposed to, what our teachers are telling us, what our parents are telling us, and that essentially sets as like the foundation for our life. And so many times you will have adults who want to be nothing like their parents, and yet they end up becoming like their parents. Why? Because that was the blueprint or the model or the software that got downloaded onto them. And so the point that I really wanted to use and to try and portray to you here is that every single one of us has a capacity to change. Every single one of us, even though you've been through a druggie and you've been involved in criminal activity, and you may have been into gambling, and you may find yourself beating your missus, you may find yourself with anger management problems, you may find yourself abusing drugs, whatever it may be for you. The whole point that I wanted to share with you, because which is why I shared with you that many of these individuals who turned their lives around is a product of their childhood, is that they also had a bad childhood. They also had a fucked up, just loads of dysfunction in their family, that when they were growing up, they had really bad software and really bad sort of firewalls downloaded onto them. But they changed. And I think where a lot of us struggle in life is that we don't recognize that we can change. We watch movies and we read about other people, and we realize, yeah, it's possible for other people to change. It is possible for people to turn their lives around. But we don't think that we can. We don't believe that we have the capacity and the power and the courage and the vigor and the strength to do it. And so your job essentially is to get to the point where you believe that you can do it, because this is where most people struggle. A lot of people who I found who are addicted to like drugs, it isn't that they didn't know that people came out on the other side. They knew loads of people who'd come out the other side. The issue that they struggled with is that they didn't think that they could do it. And this is where usually why I discovered only two things change our life. Essentially, if you're an adult, when you're over, I would probably say the age of about 24, 25, to actually change who you are as a person is almost impossible. It just isn't. And this is based on loads of research and backup and scientific research. So this is based on research. I'm not just telling you this because it sounds cool. We know that essentially when you go past about age 24, you changing as a person is nigh impossible. If you've always been a dick, you're probably going to be a dick for the rest of your life. If you've always gambled, you're probably going to gamble for the rest of your life. If you've always drunk a lot, you're probably going to drink a lot for the rest of your life. If you just basically cheat on women all the time or don't treat women very good, that's probably how you're going to be the rest of your life. And I discovered that as an adult, only two things essentially changes. Okay? Number one, we usually need to go through some kind of trauma, meaning something major, traumatic has to happen in our life. So this is where you will usually get somebody who is in a car accident and all of a sudden they have this epitome about life. Somebody is told they're going to die because they have cancer. All of a sudden they become nice and they start caring about their life and start caring about family. Do you see what I mean? Essentially, you need to go through some trauma. Some people, it's losing their mother, their grandparent. It is so traumatic for them that it shocks them. It literally, like, it's a bit like, you know when your computer freezes and it's like nothing's working, the only way to restart, to get the computer working is you essentially have to switch it all off and put it all back on again. And that essentially is what happens when you have a trauma. Essentially, the system is shocked. It literally switches all off and it restarts all over again, and you have to go all over again and restart and rebuild everything all over again. Does that kind of make sense what I mean by that? And the second way that people change is through inspiration. In other words, through desperation. Something amazing happens where people are like, usually this is because somebody's come into their life, where, for example, you've already cheated your entire life, you've had no expectations about ever looking like, not treating girls like shit, but you've met the woman of your life. You've met the one who's like the one. You've met this incredible human being. You never thought you'd ever meet anyone like her. She's kind. She looks after you. She's exactly what you want. And you're like, but her standard is you'd never go out with somebody like you. So you decide, in order to have her, you're willing to change your standards. You're willing to change the way you've always been. You see men who've always smoked their entire lives, but their partners don't like smoking. All of a sudden, they give up smoking. Men who have never been into sports, they've never have any interest in sports, and now all of a sudden they're interested in a sport. Why? Because the woman is interested in that sport. Do you see what I'm saying? And so the great thing about this is that you can, and this is where you really need to recognize, is you have the capacity to change. You have the capacity to grow. And a lot of us, as I say, where we struggle is we don't think we can change. We don't think that we can develop. We know other people can do. We know other people have quit smoking. We know other people can be great human beings. We know other people can not become druggies. We know other people can break the these dysfunction cycle in their family. We know there's loads of people who've done it, but we don't think that it can happen to us. And so our job is to essentially get to ourselves to a position where we believe that it can happen for us. When you see, I studied lots of smokers, people who basically had for ages tried to quit smoking and eventually they managed to do it. And I wanted to know, why do they keep, what happened? And what I discovered happened is that before, they knew other people could do it and they knew it was possible, but they never believed that they could do it. And the shift that happened is that they were like, do you know what? I don't care what I have to do. I don't care what I have to suffer. I don't care what I have to go through. I'm not that person. I don't want to be that person. This is a person that I want to become. This is the person I envisage. This is how I'm going to feel. This is how I'm going to be. This is how I'm going to be perceived. These are going to be the results when I eventually do. Do you see what I mean? So their narrative of who I am changes. I remember listening to a video which says, whatever follows I am is what you will manifest in your life. So for example, I ask you to think about this in your life. If you started saying the words I am, what would you end with that? I am what? I am confident, I am scared, I am a smoker, I am a druggie. What is it that's following that? Because whatever is following that sentence, those two words, I am, is whatever it is that you're manifesting in your life. You hear people say, I've always been like this. These things have always happened in my life. Things like this always happened to me. Do you see what I mean? And so people actually end up manifesting that in their life. So what we want to try to do is use I am in a positive way. I am confident. I am capable of getting rid of this addiction. I have the strength that can drive me and the hunger that can drive me to improving my health. I am the kind of person who is not a smoker. I am the kind of person who can get out of this gang life. But essentially, you want to be able to get yourself to a position where you see the possibilities for you being able to actually change and develop and take yourself to that next level. I hope that kind of makes sense what I mean by that. The second lesson that I learned from this gentleman is that remember where you came from. See, a lot of people, when they become successful, one of the things that they forget is that they basically pretend that where they've been never happened. And when you do that, what tends to happen is that you essentially, you end up spending your entire life running away from something instead of running towards something. I will repeat. If you forget where you've come from and you're like, I was never poor and I don't want to talk about when I was poor and I don't want to talk about when I was the druggie, I don't want to talk about that. What ends up happening is you end up running away from something instead of running towards something. See, it's interesting. If you run towards something, you automatically get away anyway from the thing that you don't want. But a lot of people spend their lives looking backwards and trying to get away from the thing instead of using their energy and their passion and their drive and their hunger to run towards a greater future. And the really important thing to realize about this is that you have to talk about and you have to express and acknowledge where you've been, because that way you've made peace with it. That way, when it happens, you're not triggered by it. See, what I realized about, for example, people who had gone, for example, through anorexia, where they'd gone through a point in their life where they had an eating disorder, where it was really tough for them. Some people never talked about it. They pretended as if it never happened. Whereas the people who were healthy and were happy, they talked about, this was a period in my life, I went through this, it was tough. And this is, how I felt. And they express it. They don't actually run away. They don't detach that as not being their person, who they were. It's just like that's just a version of myself, but I evolved a bit like a butterfly transforms into a butterfly. So it goes into this metamorphosis. It's still what the caterpillar is a butterfly, but it just transforms. It goes into a different version of itself, just like an acorn eventually turns into an oak tree. The acorn is an oak tree. It just transforms. It goes into a different version of itself. Does that make sense what I mean by that? And so I would highly encourage you not to say that you're not an acorn, not to say that you weren't the caterpillar, not to say that you weren't the druggie, that you weren't in the gangs, an addict, or you weren't a member of a gang. Accept it. Say that was who you are then and move on. Make peace with it. Don't evade it and say it never happened, I was never like that. Well, you don't need to defend it. Just accept it as being part of yourself and now use it to go into the next level. The third lesson that I want to share with you, which I hope adds some value to you, is to really use the day that turns your life around. So earlier on I shared with you that there are essentially 2 days that change. That 2 things have to happen in our life in order for us to change as adults. Children can do it quicker. So children can adapt and change and mold very, very quickly. That's how kids can learn, pick up languages and read books and pick up instruments very, very quickly because they're a lot more adaptable. But the older you get, the more cemented your conditioning becomes. In other words, changing becomes harder and harder and harder the more older you get. And what ends up happening is that when that day comes around, because I think one of the things that, how do I explain it? Let me get into this point in a bit more detail in the next point. But essentially, what ends up happening is when that day comes along, when it's ready for you to change, when either you're inspired, i.e. something great shows up, an opportunity shows up, or you get to the point where your desperation, where a trauma occurs in your life. A lot of people, even though they're presented with this opportunity, don't take it. So, for example, some people who are into drugs will have an opportunity to go into rehab, being paid for, everything's being paid for, but they don't take that opportunity. And they're given the opportunity to see the truth about themselves, to see themselves as exactly how they are and their addiction. But some people are there, but they're not really there. In their head, they're thinking about who they're going to see later on so that they can get another hit, or who they can try and find, or a way they can try and escape and get another hit. That's really where they're at in their head. They're not really present. They're not even here. They're hearing what you're saying, but they're just agreeing with you. A lot of people who abuse themselves or self-harm or who are self-destructive, a lot of the time they're very, very intelligent people. They know how to work people. They know how to work the system. They know how to do it. And they've been doing it for a long time. And so they're very, very good at telling people whatever it is that they want to hear. They're very good at manipulating and giving and using their talents to actually get you to believe that they've changed or whatever. But in reality, they haven't. And so what I really want to encourage you to do is, when you get to that point where you've either hit the trauma or you've got that inspiration, take it, run with it. When that opportunity comes, take it and grab it with both hands and absolutely run as far as you can with it. Because those emotions, when change usually happens when we have an intense emotion, when our emotions are really high. So when we are feeling vulnerable, when we are feeling angry, when, it's interesting because when I was reading therapy books, one of the things that they talked about is when somebody is angry, or when somebody is crying, or when somebody starts asking themselves questions, or when somebody starts doubting themselves or saying, I'm lost, that is when they're ready. Basically, they're open to new possibilities, because now they're no longer defending or protecting who they used to be. I remember I was studying a woman called Lisa Nichols, and she talked about the fact that a lot of people spend their life protecting, or trying to hide who they are or who they used to be. When that day comes, don't protect or hide. Allow it to affect you so that you can actually use that wave to go on and better your life. So that's the next lesson that I would share with you. The fourth lesson that I want to share with you is to never, ever, ever, ever give up. Earlier on, just a moment ago, I briefly said that I was going to talk about something in a little bit more detail. And what I was going to talk about is the fact that I believe that people who actually make it and become successful, having come from a really tough background, who go from being in a gang and becoming model citizens, from coming from a council estate to turning their lives around, that they really know that they were never supposed to be there anyway. Sometimes life, fate, whatever you want to call it, throws you a curveball and puts you in a situation where it's preparing you for the next level of your life. And many times you don't see why you're going through it. Many times you're like, well, but Kassim, I don't see why me becoming a druggie or becoming addicted to this or going through anorexia or self-harming. Can you tell me? I don't see how that is in some way of a benefit to me. But what the person forgets is, as Steve Jobs once says, you cannot connect the dots looking forward, you can only connect the dots looking backwards. When you're far enough in advance in your life, you will look back and say, now I get why this happened. And the thing that I want you to realise is, I know that a lot of people who make it through this, they knew they were never supposed to be there. They knew that they were never supposed to live that life. It's just it was easier and they kind of got carried away with it. And so what I would encourage you to do, and this is what I learned from Khalil, is never give up. Yes, you may be literally in going deeper and deeper and deeper into the system. You may be finding yourself absolutely lost, finding yourself in a situation where it's just like you want to give up and there is no help. And even though when you seek for help, nobody wants to help you, you may be at that stage in your life, but I ask you not to give up. Don't give up, because that day that turns your life around is coming. It is going to, it's so imminent, it's so close that you cannot even believe it. You cannot even imagine it. And so many people stop before they get to the gold. You know that story where there's a man digging for gold, and if he were to take one more, and he stops essentially before he gets to the gold, and were he to just take one more shove, that gold would have come pouring and he would have been rich. My point is, using that as a metaphor, is that you might give up when you're just that inch, that far off, that day that ultimately changes the course of your life. Meeting that person who literally inspires you, pushing yourself to such a state that now you've got yourself to a state where you have to do something about this. Does that make sense what I mean? I hope that sort of adds some value to you and gives you sort of a direction to use. But it's so important that you don't give up. Don't give up on yourself. I know the system may be against you. I know the world might be against you. I know that you are just literally a statistic. But I encourage you not to give up. Don't give in. This is the mark of a true winner. When we look at stories of people who are winners, when we look at stories of people who go on to achieve remarkable things and who we find inspirational, part of what we found inspirational was the fact that they never gave up. They never gave in. Even though the odds were against them, even though it was difficult, even though they had no hope, they still never gave in. So I encourage you not to give in. The fifth and last lesson that I want to share with you is human beings very rarely ever change. But most of the time, what changes for them is the way that they think. I will repeat. Human beings very rarely ever change. Our core values very rarely ever change. What we stand for, our ideologies really rarely ever change. The thing that changes most is the way that we think. And what I want to share with you is what you want to try to do if you really are on this pursuit to try and better your life is feed yourself with new information. Because you may not be able to change your circumstances around you. You may not be able to change the fact that you're poor. You may not be able to change the fact that you don't have money or resources or the right connections or people to help you. But you can change the way that you think. Change your possibilities. Change the way that you see the world. Change the way that you interpret what you're seeing. Because when you begin to change that, You're in the way the human psyche works is that the human spirit wants to keep us in congruence with how we define ourselves, how we think, how we behave, right? And so as you begin to change the way that you're thinking, as you begin to visualize the future that is possible for you, your body, your mind, your behavior will begin to align itself to wherever it is that you're wanting to do. It is for this reason why athletes spend so much time going through visualization. Athletes literally, and I mean, I'm talking to you now about high performance, but what athletes do is that athletes practice in their head. They sit there and they practice the race in their head, winning. They practice getting the gold medal. They make it really sensory rich, and they see what is the gold going to feel like in their hand, what's the weather going to be like, what's the crowd going to be shouting and chanting. They literally actually are there before they arrive. And human beings, we have this capacity to build something in our heads first before we see it. In fact, it would be a bit strange if you went up to somebody and you said to them, "What are you building?" and they said, "I don't know." Right? Human beings, you would say to somebody, no, they know exactly the house that they're building, and now they built it already in their head and on paper, and now they're going to go and actually manifest it and actually build it physically. And human beings, we have this capability. We can actually see ourselves out of poverty, out on the other side of being in the life of crime, and we can actually envision ourselves as model citizens, as being out there serving other people. We can actually see that before we get there. And so what I encourage you to do in your life is envision your future before you get there. Envision the person you want to become by changing your mind. Expose yourself to different people. Go and meet other people. Go and, we know that in England, anyone essentially can get a library card. We know this. Go to a library and literally sit there and just read. Read different books. Read personal development books. Read books on how to start a business. Read books about how to overcome your addictions. Just feed your mind with new information. And when you begin to do that, that all of a sudden begins to change the way that you think. The way that you think begins to change the way that you feel. The way that you feel begins to change your behavior and the decisions that you make. And as you begin to change your behavior and the decisions that you make, now the results in your life begin to change. So I encourage you to really feed your mind. Get around new stuff. If you're coming from a gang, get around people who aren't from a gang. If you're going from a place where you've been in gambling and you're in addiction, get away from people who don't do that. Get near people who think differently, who have different ideologies. Because when you do that, all of a sudden everything starts changing. Click, click, click. All of a sudden the numbers of your locks start undoing and lining up. So I hope that has added some value to you. But what do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Always keen to hear from you guys. So share with me, comment below. Also, by the way, subscribe to my channel cassimotive on YouTube if you like this video, so that I can keep sending you more of these kinds of videos, so that you can become your highest, fullest expression of yourself. Thank you so much for watching. Lots of gratitude to you, and continue seeking, once again, as I say, to be your highest, fullest expression of yourself. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.